Hey, Ryan, chapter 18, we're just going to go 1 through 15 today.
Genesis?
Uh-huh.
Genesis 18, 1 through 15.
Uh-huh.
The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mount Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered. "Do as you said." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 seahs of fine flour and knead it and bake some bread." Then he went to the herd and selected a choice, tender calf, and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk, and the calf that had been prepared, and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he said. Then the Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "If I am worn out, my master is old, I will now have his pleasure." Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child, now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did laugh."
Okay. All right, so here we go. What we see here is on the very first verse, 18:1. "The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting there at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby." Now we've heard the story, and there are 3 men standing here, and who are they?
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
No, there's 2 angels. We see 2 angels and Christ again. Now the last time we saw Christ wasn't that long ago. Remember, right, previous chapter, he came to him and he showed up to tell him about the covenant. You know, now he was going to confirm the covenant's going to come and he's going to have a son. He's talking to Abraham. He showed up. That was a long time. There's like 14 years in between the previous one before that.
And Abraham didn't hear from him
For chapter 17. Now here was a short time. And the reason why, because we didn't, and back in 17, he tells us in verse, I have to find it right there, that you will, in a year from now, you will have a baby. So he tells that Sarah in chapter 17, in a year from now, you'll have a baby. So we know from chapter 17 now he appears again. So this is the 3rd time that we see. So what we're seeing here is we're going to see 2 angels and Jesus incarnate again. Okay, now, what I want, this is kind of, it's funny, right in the middle of this story of Abraham, all of a sudden, there's chapters 18 and 19 about Sodom and Gomorrah. What's this have to do with his faith walk? You know, and Christ appears to tell him what he's going to do. He's going to come past judgment, you know, these 3 people. We're going to look at that, all right? So, Genesis 18:9 brings to reality both sides of the nature of the Son of God. Okay, this is what we're seeing here. So in other words, we see the nature of God's love towards his children and the nature of Christ in judgment. So 18 and 19, what we're seeing here is kind of the nature of the love towards his children, his friends that we're going to look at, okay, that he calls friends, and also the judgment, okay, as Christ himself. We'll see, that's important to understand, because when he appears, it's Christ who shows up here, okay, manifested as incarnate as a man. It's Christ who's going to come back for judgment. It was Christ who came here to save us. All right? So the same thing. So we get a view of the gospel at the beginning right here, even in Genesis, again here. And to see some of the significance that I see significance to these verses. Now, first thing I want to go over, I know we've gone over a lot of these verses, but we want to do this to get a picture in our head of what's going on, the contrast again. So if we go to James chapter 2. 23 and 24. James chapter 2, verses 23 and 24. And it says, and the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is justified by what he does and not by faith alone. So, he's referred to as God's friend. And see who shows up here. This is important for us to understand. This is all relationship. This whole thing's about a relationship. So Abraham, shortly after he's already seen Revelation, here comes Jesus and two angels that you'll see as we go on. You'll see how it is, the two angels. These two angels you'll see in Sodom and Gomorrah in chapter 19, verse 1. Or two men are standing there. They all manifest as men, all right? Also, so go to John 15.
Just John, the first or second?
Yeah, just John 15. Verses 14 through 15. And what makes us friends with God? So someone read that right there, 14 and 15.
You are my friends if you do what I command.
Okay, keep going on.
I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I call you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you.
All right. So he tells you right there, who are those who are his friends?
Those who do as he commands.
Those who does as he commands. And what did it say back in James who was his friend? Those who believed. It was a credit of righteousness. So what was Abraham to God? He was a friend. So what are we?
His
Friends.
To a friend. That's what I'm saying. Now, also we'll see Abraham's also a servant. Here it says he calls them two different kinds of servants. He's not calling him a servant in John, but two different kinds of servants, okay? We are a servant of God, but we're not like a slave is what he's trying to say. I'm not a servant as a slave to God. We're a friend of God, okay? Someone who's a servant is someone, would maybe work for you, okay? And in that sense, now he's referring to me as a friend. You're not a servant as if you work for me. In other words, I'd have a servant come work for me. I don't let them know everything. They come in a relationship as far as work. Right. He has a relationship to us as friends. That's the difference between him and Abraham we're seeing right here. It's important for us to understand as we're looking at these scriptures. Also, go right there in John. Go to John 8, 42 through 44. Hey, Karen, read those.
Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God, and now I am here. I have not come on my own, but he sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies.
So who are those who belong to the devil? So we see, just like we're going to see here in God's judgment, there's those who belong to Satan, the evil one, and there's those who are friends of God. And it's good to understand this contrast with what's going on now. Everybody teaches this romantic God, and God would not pass judgment, and God wouldn't do this. He's a friend. No, this is not true. There are those, and that's the contrast we're seeing here. And first he shows up to who? Who does God here show up to? Who does Christ himself show up to? A friend. Okay, he's his friend, and we'll see here. This is very neat when you look at the whole story, because you got to remember, Abraham, we are a seed of Abraham. This relates to us. This isn't just to Abraham. The story is to you. A personal relationship to you who are friends. Okay? And right in the middle of this, like I said, we see Jesus incarnate, the same Jesus, our friends, the same Jesus who's coming back to judge the world. When the wrath of the world. In fact, go to Romans chapter 2.
Romans 2.
5 through 8. Chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. Karen, you want to read that?
But because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed. God will give to each person according to what he has done. To those who, by persistence in doing good, seek glory, honor, and immortality, he will give eternal life. But for those who are self-seeking and who who reject the truth and follow evil, there will be wrath and anger.
All right. So we see that there's the friends of God, and there's the wrath of those who aren't a friend of God, okay, or enemies of God. People don't like to think I'm God's enemy. That's not. But we're getting the true picture of who Jesus is when He comes here. It's important as we go through these chapters. Let's look at another one, Psalms 5, 4 through.
Yeah, notice there is no between you and the friend or your enemy.
Yeah, but you know, especially with what's going on, you know, a lot of the teaching that God wouldn't, you know, or I don't want a God who's going to judge. Or God's going to bring wrath. Well, we're saying from the very beginning here. And we're going to look at, that's what I'm trying to, we want to get this picture, because when we go to Sodom and Gomorrah, we're going to get a picture in our eye. We won't get to there today. But you want to get a picture in the eye, the truth of who God is. Psalms 5. Psalm 5. Verses 4 and 5. It says, "You are not a God who takes pleasure in evil. With you the wicked cannot dwell. The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. You hate all who do wrong." All right? So that's pretty blatant right there. All right? There's the God who's a friend of yours, and those who oppose God, you're His enemy. All right? We have to understand that about God. And then one other, I want to look at 1 Thessalonians. Five 9, and I'll read it for you. "For God did not appoint us to suffer wrath, but to receive salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ." All right? So, for those who are in Christ that we know will not suffer His wrath. His friends will not suffer His wrath. But those who aren't in Him are going to suffer the wrath of God. So right in the middle of the story is faith walk. Christ kind of appears here. We see this whole thing. And there's a lot of reasons for why He does this. And you see as we go through it. Also, I want you to notice a couple significance. 18 and 19, we see He's a friend of God, okay, and He's having a meal. We'll see He's having a meal with them. 19, we see Sodom and Gomorrah. We all know, we've heard the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's very similar also to in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. The church is in heaven during a time of peace, supping with the Lord, and what's about to come on the earth? Judgment coming on the earth. See some of the similarities? So just like in Revelation, so here we are. He comes. He shows up just like He's going to show up for us. We're going to be dining in heaven like we see after the wedding of the Lamb. Okay, but right after the wedding of the Lamb, you know, we all know all the heavens calm. There is something coming on earth. Same thing here. So His friend of God here, who is with Him. And now another thing I know. This is things I picked up on it. So we know this is the Lord that tells us right there. The Lord appeared to Abraham, and we know there's three of them. There's two other angels. Now, if you go to, I find this interesting. If you go to Matthew 13. Okay, we'll go 13. We'll go to verses 13, 29, and 30. I'll start right there. And then remember we studied the parables of that. It says, "No," 29, "no," He answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in a bundle to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into the barn." So okay, now if we go over to same chapter, verse 39. "And the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is at the end of the age, and the harvesters are who? The angels." So who gives the command to do what? Right? So we see the Son of Man, He's with them, and He has His angels, the harvesters.
Wow, that's crazy.
That's what I kind of picked up. You see some of the similarities? Yeah, you kind of see some of the similarities. And when I was reading this, I picked this up. Because we'll see, if you look at 19, go to 19:1, says, the two angels arrived in Genesis, the two angels arrived at Sodom and Gomorrah in the evening. Okay, so we'll see as they go on, as they part, Jesus, okay, who's with them, Son of God, who's supping with them, then the two angels go off to do, the work of the Lord. Very interesting. Isn't that something? So it could be symbolic, that's my pickup on that, whether that's,
it shows the constants of God. Right?
The consistencies of God. So I see consistency with, here we are, like this. He made him a promise. the promise now is going to, okay, and he shows up again, just like we've been promising. Okay, now, it's like now we're in, it's similar, we're now in heaven, we're feasting the wedding of the Lamb, okay, but what's getting ready to come on earth will come, okay, which is the tribulations, kind of similar we have here. Christ shows up, right, and when he comes back, right, what is he coming with? His angels, they're the harvesters, to pick the weeds, the tares, wheats and tares, remember? So isn't that interesting? So he comes to feast with them. We're in heaven with angels and the Son of God. And when he comes back, he's going to go there with what? See what I'm saying? I find that very, yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I like how to start with that.
I love the nuggets.
In verse, so we said that was verse 1 and 2. So I'll read that again. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed down low to the ground. Okay, so when Christ, when he appeared to him, okay, where were they at? They're at Mamre. Remember where Mamre was? We see back there it was 13:8. And 13:8, Genesis 13:8.
Wasn't that right between?
Well, 13:18, I'll read it to you real quick. You don't have to go there. So Abraham moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre and Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. Remember, after all said, he ended up there, and now that's where they're at this Mamre. And remember, this is where he built altars. Okay, so we see the significance to that, all right? The altar is a place of worship and of permanence, okay? Now, another thing we need to understand, too, the trees represented in this, it was a semi-dry area, okay, and it had the presence of underground water, okay, and it was a place to escape from the heat. They're saying, they claim that in the heat in those days, under these trees, okay, if you look at it, it says trees and then a tree. So they talked that there was many trees and that you could literally get 60-degree cut in the weather. Really? It would get that hot out in the desert, and there's a place that would literally come down up to temperatures of 60 degrees.
Because of the water underneath it.
The water and the trees. Right. Okay, now let's just find that interesting. And let me see. Now, see, you got to remember the reason why it represents these trees underground. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It also is a group of trees, underground water, our source of water. See, things like this are very interesting when you put all this stuff together. You can see, sorry, I have to itch my back. Oh. All right. So we see that it was the place to escape. That's another way it was. It was a source of life and strength. All right. Now notice Abraham saw Christ appeared, and why did Christ appear to him like this? When Christ came as a friend, where was Abraham? He was doing what? In God. Remember before. There would be times when Christ didn't talk. And remember when he would get out of God's will, he wouldn't be hearing from God. Okay. Now here he comes and makes another promise. And where did Christ find him? Right there at Mamre. Okay? Okay, where he built the altars. Okay, yeah, where he built the altars. Where God, okay? And the place, remember, we're going to look at Sodom and Gomorrah. He wasn't Sodom and Gomorrah. Where was he? So where wasn't he? Go to Psalms chapter 1. Psalms chapter 1. The point is when Christ shows up, where are we going to be? Psalms chapter 1. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his laws he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yield its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does, he prospers. Not so for the wicked; they are like chaff, and that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor are sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. So there's some symbolism there when now Abraham's sitting in his tent, just like we are right here, whatever, and all of a sudden he sees these 3 men. We don't know if he recognized them, but we see here that he definitely recognized them. But at first, did he recognize them? We've seen, obviously, Christ 2 other times, you know what I'm saying, but not the Son of God like we knew him here on earth, okay? So obviously he must have recognized who he was, okay? in the tent. There's a couple things there. He was looking, okay, and where was he found when Christ came? He wasn't down in Sodom and Gomorrah. He wasn't in the council of the wicked. He wasn't sitting with God mockers, was he? Okay? We want to have friendship. We want to dine with Christ. We all want that. But yet we're sitting in the presence of mockers, and people mock God. We're sitting with sinners, and you think God is going to show up. It doesn't happen that way. Notice when Christ appears to him. Okay? These are things important. And notice he was at his tent. Now think about this too. You know, when he was sitting at his tent, they had a bored life. He's probably sitting around. He was sitting around. I'm really bored. I need to go do something. I'm going to head down to Sodom over there. Let's go on. You know what I'm saying? Right? Okay, he could have done that. That's what we do. Boredom will really get you into sin. Yeah. We know that. Now imagine their life, how bored it was.
It was all work too.
Right. And it all worked. And you know what I'm saying? Now, and another thing too, look, another thing I pick out of the scripture in Genesis is that he was at his tent. He was looking. We're going to look for the Lord. The coming of the Lord. We're to look for him. And we're to look for things of God. Okay? You know what I'm saying? He's at the tent. He was in the presence of God. He was in the will of God. He was in these trees. Okay? You got to remember, they're out there. Now, remember, Sodom and Gomorrah was a beautiful place, like the garden, okay? More attractive probably than where, okay? So those are things that we need to kind of remember. Back in Genesis, verse 3, he said, Abraham says, he said, if I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. So Abraham, first thing, he calls himself a servant of God. That's one thing I want you to notice. Okay? He calls himself a servant. And he asks him to show favor. All right? Favor, the word there in the Hebrew there means grace or acceptance. Okay? Now, we found favor when we put our trust in God. We have favor. We're blameless. God has found favor on us through his grace. And we know he found favor with Abraham because he said before, we saw that before, where he's been found righteous. Okay? And what's he referring to? Okay? Yeah, what's he referring to if he found favor? Okay? He's found favor by, in other words, what he's trying to say, is he a good servant? Have you, you know what I'm saying, you found me in the place of a good servanthood. Don't pass me by. Simple fact is, if we're not in God's will, he's not going to hear us, and he's going to pass. We want, we say, oh, I want to be in God's will, or I need this from God, but we're not in God's will, okay? Or God might have a blessing in store for us. But when we're sitting in the council, of sinners and stuff, God doesn't show favor. There's the favor of God that we automatically get a grace. Everybody's getting, that's favor. That's something freed. But there's also favor, we see that Abraham gets blessed anyway, whether he's a sin or not. Those are things. But there's certain times, there's certain things, as a servant, if we want God to show favor to us, where is God finding you right now when you're asking for favor? Where are you at? And where was Abraham at? Have you found favor upon him? That's what he asked him. He asked him a question. Don't pass me by. Okay? Go to Psalm 66:18. It says, if I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But God has surely listened and heard my prayer, heard my voice in my prayer. Praise be to God, who has not rejected my prayer or withheld his love from me. All right? Why? Because he wouldn't have cherished. It's the same thing. If we want God to show favor upon our life, all right, as a servant, we need to be in his will. Now, the thing we want to hear, this favor word is really big with the prosperity teachers. The favor. This is not what he's referring to. I do something to receive something. Okay? If I'm a servant of the Lord and I'm truly a servant of the Lord, okay, then I sit with the Lord. And notice where he referred to himself. I'm a servant of you, Lord. Don't pass me by. If you find me to be a good servant, don't pass me by. Have you found favor upon me, Lord? You know what I'm saying? Am I upright? That's what he's asking. Does God look at you? We'll say, I want to do God's will. I want to be a servant of the Lord. Don't pass me by, Lord. Are you upright? Are you living under the statutes God has required us, asked us to live? Or are we living a life set apart? Okay, we need to think of that. Go to James chapter 4, verse 3. 4:3. Where was that at here? Oh yeah. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. So, in other words, people asking God for their favor. He's not asking God, do you find favor on me for the things of pleasure? Don't pass me by. Or do you ask me because I have the right motive in my heart? Am I a servant of heart to you? So Abraham, don't pass me by. Do you see my heart as a servant's heart? Or is it a heart after my own self? The prosperity teaching teaches that God grants favor on me, and this is exactly what James is saying. You ask, and whatever you're receiving isn't from God, because the motives of yours is to get things to spend on pleasure. That's not God's motives. That's not a servant's heart. That's what he's referring to. Okay? Abraham calls himself a servant who seeks God's will. Okay? Is God's will, not favor in his life or his life, but to do the will of God. And what is that? Mark chapter 9. Someone go to Mark 9:35. Mark 9:35.
So sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, if anyone wants to be first, he must be very last and the servant of all.
Right. That's exactly what there. That's what. So when he asked what kind of servant am I qualified, it's his heart. God will pass us by if our motives are wrong as a servant. Okay? We can't think we're going to be God's, so many people say, I want to be a servant, or I want to do the God's will, but we really still want to do this part. Okay? Our motives aren't, and God knows that. And so he found him to be what? He showed favor upon him because he knew his heart. And he showed up there. He showed up with him to have a meal with him. And it's really, really neat when you see it like that. All right? As we see verses, I'll keep going through 3, from verses 1 through 6 that we've already read. All right, we're going to look at some of the aspects of a servant. Okay?
Genesis?
Back in Genesis. So we'll notice some of the aspects of a servant's heart found in Abraham. All right. All right. In verse 2, he says, if we look at verse 2, Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed down low to the ground. The bowing down to the ground. Now, when you look at that, we don't bow down to angels. Part of that, you understand, is a culture. We have to understand that. It was culture, and it was a respectful thing. But he also bowed down. We know probably when you look at her, he recognized who Christ was. That's who he was bowing down, okay? But we have to always understand that we don't bow down to no angels or no man or anything like that. It was God. So when we're reading that, he wasn't bowing down to an angel or anything like that. We didn't understand that, okay? So part of the servant's heart was his quickness. Okay, remember he was about 100 years old. Abraham was about 100 years old. But he didn't hesitate, all right? He gave the Lord his best. Go to Colossians chapter 3. Okay, Colossians, what did I say? Colossians 3. Sure would be nice if we had one of those things that just puts it up on a projector, huh? 3, 23 and 24. Chapter 3, verses 23 and 24. Ryan, you want to read that for me?
Yeah. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving.
Okay, go to Ephesians chapter 6. 5 through 9, 6, 5 through 9. Karen, you want to read that for me?
Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him.
So a servant's heart, he had a servant's heart. He was quick to serve God, and he did it not for the glory of man, not for the glory of himself, for the glory of who? For God. He's serving everything he did. When we're talking about masters and slaves, that would be like our employers. You know, somebody's, oh, I can't stand doing this for this person. We work as we're working unto the Lord, because the Lord asked us to do it. That's why. We do it with the servant. So servant's heart, he was quick to do it, happy to do it for the Lord. All right. Also, a servant was found favor in God's eyes is one who's doing what God assigned them to do, not what they assigned themselves to do. We have to understand that. Really big in ministry that people think, I'm going to go ministry and do what I want to do. 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians 10.
Okay, 1:10?
Just 10. 2 Corinthians. And we'll go verses 12 through 18. It's a lot. Ryan, you want to read that for me?
Sure. We do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise. We, however, will not boast beyond proper limits, but will confine our boasting to the field God has assigned to us, the field that reaches even to you. We are not going too far in our boasting, as would be the case if we had not come to you, for we did not get as far as you with the gospel of Christ. Neither do we go beyond our limits by boasting of work done by others. Our hope is that, as your faith continues to grow, our area of activity among you will greatly expand, so that we can preach the gospel in the regions beyond you. For we do not want to boast about work already done in another man's territory. But let him who boast in the Lord. It is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends.
All right. So what does it say right there? They don't do anything. A true servant of God isn't doing what they want to do. That's what God is. A servant of who? Of God. He was a servant. I'm willing to serve you, Lord. Not me. Not to boast about what I can do. And not take credit for somebody else's ministry. You ever notice that? It's very clear here. A lot of people like to do, try to take or encroach to somebody else's ministry and say, this isn't, you see, a true servant's heart isn't about, him being noticed. That's what Abraham did here. He said he wanted to serve the Lord. Also, if you look at a servant, also doesn't just talk about God's will. Another thing too, he does it. That's what we're seeing Abraham do here. What did he do? You guys go to James chapter 2, 14 through 18.
14 through 18.
Uh-huh.
What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, "Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. So
we saw Abraham looked up and saw three. I'm back in.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah. See, look. I'm going to read to you after you read that in Genesis. It says Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed down low to them. He said, if you have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. So did he do it? Yeah, he went and did it. Go to 1 John chapter 3 while you're there, Ryan. 1 John chapter 3. And what did he say in verse 5? Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant. What does it say in 1 John?
3 what?
3:16 through 18.
This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth.
So Abraham saw them. He was a servant. He specified a servant. Do you find me worthy of a servant? Humbly, am I even worthy to serve you, Lord? It wasn't like I'm going to serve you and get something from it, right? You know, am I worthy? You're going to pass me by? And he ran to quickly do something. He ran quick. He did what he said. He didn't just talk the story. He actually did. There was action. You know, it's like you're calling yourself a Christian, but I have no action from my Christian. It's the same thing. Can I go, you know, I'm going to serve you. He ran and he got it. Verses 7 and 8. Back in Genesis. It says, Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice and tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. And then in verse 8, where am I at here? Oh, he then brought some curd and some milk and the calf that had been prepared and set that before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. All right. So what did he do? He gave us one thing. You notice that he picked out the calf personally. So what we have to understand that it personally cost him something. Being a servant to him was a personal cost to him. He didn't send somebody out to do his servanthood. There were people there, servants that helped him do it.
And he picked a choice one.
And he picked a choice one. He gave him the best, and it cost him something personally. In other words, I'm not serving anybody if I go, just go get it. He might have had servants who prepared it because he was taking care of his guests. He went and picked it, okay, just like anything else, okay? Luke chapter 14. Karen, read that for me. 14:25.
Luke 14?
25 to 27.
Large crowds were traveling. Did I get that right?
17. I'm sorry, 14.
Yeah, 14,
25 through, yeah.
Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple.
See, it costs something to be a disciple of Christ. It costs something to be a servant of Him. It's not about me. Do you find me, Lord? Don't pass me on. Have you found me to have a servant's heart? Or looks like, because he examines you, he says, no, you're still one of that. You'd rather serve your wife. You'd rather serve your kid. You'd rather hold on to your mom or dad. That's what he's saying. See, that like Abraham did. Remember? Somebody had to die before he served. He had to wait for his father to die before he would held on to it. And that's what he's saying. Did he find a servant? He didn't have a full servant's heart then. Have you found now? He found him to have a servant's heart. We look at ourselves. Do I have a servant heart? Am I really ready to serve you completely, Lord? Do you find me as a good servant, Lord? Am I quick to serve you, or is it about me? Okay? That's the whole thing. Do I have to have recognition about all my serving? You know, that's the biggest thing. People, the biggest servants, we don't even know who they are. We're in heaven, we're going to see, you know, we're always thinking about the big guys you see on TV. And there's going to be people out there we never even heard of.
Getting some great reward.
That's the true servants of God. Okay? We have to see that. Then if you notice in Genesis, back in 18, and he says, while they ate, he stood near them under a tree. All right? So while he served them, he stood there near the Lord to listen for the Lord's voice. He didn't just take off. He served them. And when go to Psalm 73.
So really, he waited on him.
Yeah, he served. You know, he was serving. The whole thing is servanthood. You know what I'm saying? Christ came as a servant. And here we see him. You know, the point I want to miss back in also when he did that, when he told him, he said, Lord, I'm going to serve you. Notice that also the Lord said to him back in verse 5, and this is in Genesis, he says, very well, they answered, do as you say. He says, okay, if you're a servant and you're saying, go do it. So that was evidence. The action we talked about, a feeding. He says, okay, you're a servant, go do it then. Right. Okay? Don't talk about it, do it. Yes, go, do as you say. You're going to serve me, go and make disciples out of nations. Don't talk about it, do it. So that's a servant attitude. Okay, go do it then. I'm not doing it. You're not really one of my disciples. See it? See all the correlations there? Psalm 73. Let's do it from 21 through 28. Karen, would you read that for me?
Yes. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I I was a brute beast before you, yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. How far? 28?
Yeah.
Whom have I in heaven but you? In earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds.
I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. And see, he stood nearby. He was a servant. He stayed nearby the Lord. He's a friend of the Lord. He didn't go, see what I'm saying?
I have a question. Why didn't he invite them into the tent? Why are they still outside?
There was a custom of the day. Okay, Sarah, you'll see, she's still in the tent. Women, and you got to understand.
They had their place.
Right. So that's not how they did things. And he took them, he shaded them in and bring it outdoors and underneath the trees where the cooling of it is. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
That's why he rushed out to see them. Okay, that was part of the whole reason.
Okay.
Yeah, it had a lot to do with the culture. I don't know if that's always though. If there wasn't times when they wouldn't invite him in that.
Come into my house. Come, make yourself come.
Right. And at this situation, actually, I don't know why he didn't, outside of Sarah being in there, because culturally, I know that the woman wasn't. That's why you got to understand.
They weren't supposed to be seen.
Well, they weren't. Okay, when the men were eating, they weren't even supposed to be coming out among them. They were supposed to still notice, and that's one thing you got to notice, and that's a good thing you pointed that out, because what's coming up here. Remember something. Now let's go back. We'll see. We'll go back to Genesis.
I have a question also.
Okay.
I noticed, I get this because he's a servant. I noticed that he didn't join them. He stayed near them while they ate, but he didn't join them. And I could see that because he's a servant. He's serving them.
Right.
But didn't it also say that he's their friend?
Not yet, right?
No, they're his friend. But the picture of this is that, see, that part of it was their culture. This is what you did.
The picture is
Right. The servanthood. The picture of it is servanthood. See, you give to other. I don't have to partake. I'm serving you.
Gotcha.
Okay? I'm serving you what's mine. I'm not even eating what's mine.
Right.
See what I'm saying? I'm serving you.
I'm serving you the best of what I got.
I'm giving the Lord the best of what I got. It's the same thing. It's a picture of we as servants is what we do. It's not about us eating. He could have sat down and ate with them. But the first thing when he saw him, what can I do for you? Okay, can I sit down? Can I feed you? I want to feed you a meal. Oh, okay, I'll fine. You know what I'm saying? And that's what he did. And he sat down and he fed his guest. And that was the whole point of this.
I just noticed that in other parts of the Bible, it is come into my home and they all dine together.
Right.
When Jesus is actually, there.
Right.
Christ is walking among them. That's what they did. They would come to the house and they would all eat together as friends. So I was just curious to say, at this point, Abraham is clearly he's only serving.
Well, we see Abraham here. Don't forget. Now, also remember in the New Testament, Christ serves. He's a servant.
Oh, yeah.
Don't forget, Christ is a servant. He washed. What is Abraham doing here?
He
washed their feet. Who did that? Christ washed their feet. Yeah. Christ came as a servant.
Yes.
See?
Christ washed the disciples.
Now remember, we're Abraham's seed. So it's a representation. We are what? Servants.
Right.
We're the seed of Abraham. We are servants of the Lord. Okay? Do you kind of see the whole thing? See, it's not just Christ. Christ came as a servant.
Right.
And we're servants. If we're the seed of Abraham, we're just like Abraham. See all the symbol. It's not about me. It's about serving you. And what he's showing, when I sit down and I have people, it's not just, he's serving God, and these two angels, and Jesus himself personally. It's representation of how we treat others. Right. Same Christ and me treating you. So sit down. You see, I'm giving you out of me. I'm not even partaking. It could have been the last I have, but I'm giving to you. See what I'm saying? It was the whole hospitality, the whole friendship. He's showing. You see what I'm saying? You kind of see the whole picture? Yeah. And then, like I said, okay, now 13. Now, what you guys mentioned is kind of interesting about Sarah. Now 19. I'm sure back in Genesis 18. And 9 verses 9 through 15 is a message about a child. All right. See, you got to remember when Sarah, when the promises and stuff before about the child, Sarah didn't hear it personally from the Lord. This is something we never picked up. She always heard it second nature, right, from Abraham. Right.
It's just like Adam and Eve.
Right. So she never. So she right? So Adam, you know what I'm saying? Now remember, she didn't hear it personally from the Lord. She heard it from her husband. Right. This part, now and remember if you go back to 17, this wasn't that long time. He told Abraham, you're going to have a child. Now his purpose for right here is to come and tell Sarah. See, now she's going to personally hear it from the Lord's mouth herself. All right? And how many times over and over has we been told this? Like, seems like he keeps saying this over and over, right? Yeah, when's this going to happen? It's been 25 years, right? Why?
I would be upset.
Okay, but why though? Go to Romans chapter 10. This is why God keeps telling. He has something planned for us, but why does he keep telling us over and over and over?
Well, to remind you. But
I know, but...
Well, my question would be, why doesn't he do it sooner? You know, that's my question.
Well, because we don't know it's in God's timing. That's the whole point.
Romans 10 or 25?
10.
Because he also knows our hearts.
Right. So he tells us a promise, and then he keeps reminding. Why? 10:17. Romans chapter 10, verse 17. Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. All right. So why? By constantly hearing the word of Christ, by constantly how that's our faith is built. The reason God keeps telling me, keeps coming back and telling them, it builds their faith because we keep doubting. He comes. That's what the word of God for. Okay, we have a promise. Okay, let me put it this way. We always think, and this is very easy, especially now as Christians. When's the rapture going to happen? When's the return? You start thinking, is it ever going to happen?
Not my lifetime.
Well, let's think about this. When was the first promise of Jesus' first coming back? Back in chapter what? Chapter 3 in Genesis. From the beginning, he promised a child. Thousands of years later, he came, just like he said he would. Don't think people will say, my gosh, just this promise, child, when's that going to happen? Just like we're saying, this promise of your return, when's it going to happen? Well, how many thousands of years was it before he made that promise and the first coming came?
That's a good point, Dan.
Now the second thing, he said, look, I will return. He tells his disciples, where I'm going, you're not going. I'm going to prepare a place, but I will, what? Return for you. It's the same thing. See, we're thinking in our timing. He did come the first time, and he will come the second time. And we have to be reminded, so he does it by the word, we get faith. We got to keep doing this, because if we don't, we're sheep. We will lose our faith. We have an enemy out there, and that's why God doesn't do it because, what's his reason? Because I'm just reminding you, it's to build his faith. It's to build his faith. It's to build his faith. You know what I'm saying? That's what this is about.
And
right.
Sarah, it was pretty obvious that Sarah didn't even believe it because she laughed. It's like,
Yeah.
I'll see.
Yeah, that's exactly. If we go, let's go back into Genesis and we'll look at that. I want you to look at some things on that. That's really good. Verses, what did I say? 9.
Yeah, we're 9 through 15.
Yeah. Then they asked, "Where's your wife? Where's your wife, Sarah?" They asked him. Now, in that one thing we have to know about right there, I want you to understand that they called her by name. They personally knew who she was. These are friends. They knew who she was. You notice that? They say, "Where's your wife?" You call her by name. "Where's your wife?" There in the tent, he said. Then the Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Okay? So he's telling them right there, look, Sarah's going to have a son this time next year. This is already fulfilled. So we know it was a short time from chapter 17. This is the second time, okay? Now Sarah was listening at the entrance. So God knew, he knew what was going on right there. And she was listening personally to the words. Okay, where's your wife Sarah? You know what I'm saying? When you wanted her to hear these words. Okay? You got to remember, that was their culture. How the women were. And Christ asked him, "Where's your wife Sarah? How come she's not in my presence?" See? Because God doesn't do that. You see what I'm saying? That was the human culture. That was a man's standard. That wasn't God's standard. See? So think about that. Where's your wife Sarah? Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed. Now, before, in verse 17, Abraham laughed. His laugh was full of joy because he knew it. He had joy. Now she laughs with doubt. Right, because understandably, exactly. So Sarah laughed to herself. Now I want you to notice that. Very important. As she thought, after I am worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure? The pleasure is referring to, in other words, they haven't had sexual relationships. They're too old, they haven't had sexual relationships. So she's laughing and said, yeah, we haven't had sex. How are we going to have, because we're beyond the years even doing that.
Right.
That's what it's referring to. Okay? So she's laughing at, but I want you to notice something. So Sarah laughed to herself. It wasn't out loud.
So it was in her head.
And
She's laughing.
so it was a thought, and she's laughing to herself. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like me or you would even know. Just like right now. And then verse 13. Then the Lord said to Abram, why did Sarah laugh? And say, will I really have a child that I am old? Huh?
Dad.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead and read that. Hold on a second.
I just, you said like that she laughed to herself.
Right.
I remember because like last week I read over and over again about Abraham whenever, you know, he reacted similarly, and it says here that Abraham fell face down and he laughed and he said to himself.
Right.
So he did the same thing.
He did the same thing.
That's good.
Okay? Now, but the point is now watch, here's what I'm trying to say. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out, okay, then in verse 13, then the Lord said to Abram, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Will I return to you and appoint, I will return to you at an appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did. You did laugh. Christ said, yes, you did. You did laugh. The point of this is that she didn't say it loud, I'll lie to God. I didn't say that. Christ said, oh, yeah, you did. You know why? Because I'm God. So go to Hebrews chapter 4. So here's Sarah, just like what we do.
The thing is, if she knows that God just repeated what she thought, how could she even possibly lie?
Because don't we do that all the time?
I was going to say, that's just like Adam and Eve. They know who he was entirely. And they still lie to him.
Isn't that what we do all the time?
Yeah. We know who God is. We still lie to him.
I mean, we start thinking on him and says, wait, this has gone a little too far. We haven't had, you got to remember, wasn't just a baby. They haven't had sex, Karen. He's 100 years old. Yeah. So what are you talking about? She's already been on menopause for sex isn't pleasurable for her. Nothing of that's even pleasurable. Does it mean pleasure? She used the word pleasure. That means this isn't even pleasure. Why do we even do that? We don't even do that anymore. What are you talking about? Right? How's this going to happen? That's what she's thinking in her head. Think about it. That's logical.
Yeah, she said, even my husband's too old.
And God says, what, is anything, she's questioning her. So what, you think something's too hard for me? I'm God, right? I didn't say nothing. He knows your thoughts. Right. You didn't? Yeah, you did. Because what does it say right here in Hebrews, chapter 4, verse 12? For the word of the Lord, the word of God is living and active, sharper than a double-edged sword. It penetrates even dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Nothing at all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. So she's right there in front of the Lord, and she just like what?
She got caught. It was like
and her thoughts. He won't know my thought. He doesn't know. I said, yeah, you did. Yeah. See, that's the thing. We can't hide. The point of that story is like, look, your doubts aren't hidden from God. On the outside, we can love, but God, and right here it says, yeah, you did. You did laugh. Now, why did you lie to me? You laughed. And they asked her, is anything too hard? Okay, while you're there, go to Exodus 15:11.
Is that the story of Moses?
Uh-huh. 15:11. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and read that.
Who among the gods is like you, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders?
Yeah. Working wonders. You stretch out your right hand, and the earth swallow them up. So what he's trying to, the same thing there. Who is like you? Is there any, and that's what he's asking Sarah. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? And that's the question to us. You doubt in your mind. You think I don't know. She thought, you didn't hear me laugh. I know what you said. Is there anything too hard for me? Oh, no, Lord. No. Yeah, there is. In your mind, there is. That's what you're saying. That's what we examine ourselves. You saying something's too hard for me? You think God doesn't know what we're thinking? That's what's very interesting. She laughed in her heart. We laugh. We have things. You see what I'm talking about? She's in the tent. Hey, where's Sarah? Okay, and that's another thing too. She says, where's Sarah? How would you know? I said, because I'm God. I know everything. Doesn't matter if you're in the tent, beyond the tree. Another thing, I know what you think. I know everything about you. And what you did, you just doubted. Now you're telling me, after all you've gone through, all this thing, I'm asking you, is there anything too hard for the Lord? Do you believe I can do this or not? I really can't do anything for you if you really don't believe it. Even though God does at times. But see the point? It's a faith thing. He's over and over. Is there anything too hard? He said, this time next year, you will. It wasn't you might, you will have a child. This message he did here was for Sarah. Now, even though Sarah doubted, if you look back in, Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did laugh. 2 Timothy chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2, verse 13.
Verse 13? If we are faithless, he will remain faithful, for he cannot disown himself.
So it didn't make any difference if she doubted. He already made the promise, and he came and told her, this time next year, you're going to have a baby. And even though she laughed, you laughed, why? You doubt what I'm going to do? You're doubting what I'm going to do? It didn't matter if she was, or our faith doesn't cause, in other words, doesn't depend on God's promises. Okay? In other words, because I don't have, God's can't create the world because of my faith. I have nothing to do with what God's promise. What his promises are, he will bring to his promises. Okay? We have to have faith in certain things to happen. If I don't believe in certain, or the wrong motives of my faith, of course. But the point is, it didn't make any difference if she doubted. You will. I'm going to show you. And that's what builds our faith. Even in our doubt, okay, God says, really? You really don't believe I can do that? Watch. Now, our faith will build. And it was time after time. Now, they've seen the parents say time after, and this is just like us, okay? And faith comes by what? Hearing. So that's why we need to always do this. Faith comes by hearing the Word of God. We forget day by day. We need to hear God's promises over and over. And, like I said, the big one we are right now, it's so easy to say, is this really going to, Lord, are you really going to have a rapture? Is this going to happen? When's this going to happen? And God tells us, look, your redemption is nigh. Look at the seasons around, okay? And you see what's going on? I am going to return.
Isn't that what Abraham was doing? He was looking?
Yeah, and that's an example of that. He's at the tent looking out, and he saw. Now look, if he wasn't, the example of that is if we're not looking, if we're in our own life not looking, we'll miss the things of the Lord could be right here doing something in our life, and I'm not looking out the tent for the Lord. I'm looking at my own thing. I'm going to miss what the Lord had for me. He already had that blessing there for me. I had it there for you. I was right there, but you didn't see me. You were off doing your own thing. See? But he showed up, and what did he do? He ran to the land. What can I do for you, Lord? Do I have a servant's heart? Is my heart? Look, am I upright enough for you? I want to serve you. I don't want to serve me. See what I'm saying? That's Abraham. See, that's how he was. At 100 years old. 100 years old, that was the heart. Now, he could have been, said, I think, whatever. It's been a while. I think I'm going to go down and visit Lot down in Sodom. You know what I'm saying? And the Lord shows up and said, where's Lot? And where's Abraham at? I had something for Abraham, but I guess I missed him. See what I'm saying? See how it is? And that's the thing. We have to always be prepared for where are we going to be. I always like the Psalms, when I look at the Psalms going, where are we going to be when Christ shows up? And where are we right now in Christ's life? It's not about living a perfect life, but it's where are we? Where is my heart right now? That's what we need to look at ourselves when we look at the story. If I'm really a servant and I'm called to be a servant, am I really a servant after God's heart or a servant after my heart? Is he going to pass me by and say, no, your heart isn't, your motives are wrong in your heart? Or is he going to say, no, you have the right motives, and your motives are after me? Like Abraham. Abraham's motives were as a servant after God. He wasn't a servant for himself. He was a servant after God. And he's totally blessed by that. That's a hard concept for us because human nature it's about me, not about you. But God, his servants, is not about us. It's about others. It's about him. The focus is completely on him. That's serving him. The best it's not an easy life. But these are good examples. As we've gone through the story of Abraham, if we've seen her, you see he's just like us. Remember, he was an idolater. Remember? Okay, he looked at his ups and downs. He went out, but he was a big doubter. He was still, he had his times where he doubted, and then he came, what I'm saying? But every time he doubted, he got stronger. The Lord comes, just like he does with us, and his faith grew and grew. And he was God found his heart worthy of being a servant. Yeah, I'm going to sit and dine with you because you are, your motives are right. You're not asking me for something because you want to go out for yourself and spend by yourself a Mercedes-Benz. That's the teaching we have. That's the teaching we have now. I'm a servant of the Lord, and I need money. Part of my thing is just like a CEO. I get a Mercedes-Benz from just like, really? Okay, Abraham is a very, very, very rich man. What's he doing living in a tent? He was very wealthy. Why was he living in a tent? Why wasn't that money so important to him? He had more money probably than all of Israel. You think about it. At the time, that's what, think about how much money he had. Remember, he's very wealthy. Well, he didn't live like a wealthy man.
He was very humble.
Because his heart wasn't after that. He had a servant's heart, and God blessed him anyway. See my point? That's the whole thing. So what he gives us, you know, we can choose to do something and abuse it. He could have abused it. You know, we'd be reading a whole different book.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? Thing like that. So we'll leave it at that. And next week we'll start into for the second part where it starts in and going to Sodom and Gomorrah, and then we'll get into, Sodom and Gomorrah after that. All right.